Hey, we are live. Yet another Ask Us Anything session. Scott with semi-improved audio. It's gonna get even better later. But now we can hear him. Say something, just to
Hey
confirm
everyone.
that your audio volume is not off this time.
Exactly. Hopefully today is better, and hopefully next week will be even better.
Okay. So, no agenda, nothing special. Just going through your questions. Some of the questions we did not answer in the last session, but this time I copied them, so we're gonna go through those. Questions as well. Everything goes. So let's start with the one from the previous session from Anshuman. How do you manage release process versioning of applications and saving artifacts? Also, how do you link them to Jira board items? Release process. In my head, there are those questions come along all the time, and in my head, I never fully understood them because to me it sounds very easy. Kind of build an image, push them to registry, modify a manifest, push it to Git, and make sure. Otherwise, you will be fired if you ever work with me. Name your releases using semantic versioning. I freak out when people don't use semantic versioning. I hate it so much.
Yeah. So I agree. I think there's a few other things that can be done to be a bit more, let's say, on the advanced side that I happen to like. For example, I agree with the semantic versioning. I do believe in semantic versioning, plus and then adding like the SHA commit of Git. Anything afterwards for non-production builds. Production builds should be just a semantic version, but anything going up to that of the internal builds should all be what it is planned to be, plus whatever the Git SHA is, or plus RC1, RC2, RC3 for release candidates. When it comes to how to manage the versioning of applications, that's always a challenge, right? How do you actually version something? And that's where contract testing and automated contract testing should come in. Because if you have an application in your testing pipeline of the app, you test, do I break any contracts? Am I not breaking any contracts? Where am I there? And based off of that, you can have automation that says, great, this is a major, this is a minor, this is a, just security patch. You have to add logic into your pipelines to do this, add in contract testing tooling, but that's the optimal way because the amount of times, unfortunately, that I've seen people release patch versions that end up actually breaking things because they didn't do contract testing. If you're going to do semantic versioning, do it correctly. Victor gets annoyed when people don't do semantic versioning. I get even more annoyed when people use semantic versioning incorrectly and say that a patch version, and have a breaking change, or do a minor version when there's no breaking changes and it's just vulnerability fixes, for example.
If you don't use it correctly, then it's pointless to use it in the first place. Because the whole point of semantic, the only so I couldn't care less whether it's semantic or something else. What I do want to know, is this safe? Is it a patch?
Right.
That's supposed to be safe. I can install it without thinking about it twice, right? Is there a new feature that would be the minor, or is it a breaking change? That should be the major version, right? That's the only reason why I care about semantic versioning. If you give me some other way how I can know whether it's this or that, I'm all for it. I mean, I'm not, because then I would need to learn the second versioning scheme, but outside of that.
Exactly. Right.
And how do you link them with Jira board items or any other, right?
I mean, you do it through CI, right? When you create an artifact, it depends. I've seen people that trigger CI from Jira, right? That actually Jira is what triggers a pipeline in many cases. Like the release pipe, obviously CI typically auto-triggered from a Git commit, whatever. But when you go into the release pipeline, that many times in companies is triggered actually from Jira when like the project manager decides, okay, we're going to release a version, then it gets triggered from there and can be tied back up. Typically, though, I say use a GitHub action that, adds some metadata into Jira. Or better yet, don't hook it up into Jira, set up Backstage or Port or whatever internal developer portal you have, and just show the data from multiple systems. Stop manually connecting everything and just have one place that can stitch it together in a more fluid manner.
I mean, if you do insist on Jira or any other ticketing system, the thing that worked really well for me is when you're committing something, two options. Either one, when you're committing something, you have some naming convention and say Jira XYZ, and then you can easily parse that in your CI, in your workflow, and push things to Jira. Okay, this is release 17.5.3, whatever it is, right? Or some kind of pull request convention. Okay, so pull requests or branches, right? As long as you have some convention, you're fine, right? But you need somehow to tell Git, this is related with this Jira, otherwise pipeline will never know.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, now the live question from Liam. What do you think about clusters with mixture of cloud and bare metal machines? And I will assume for this question, and Liam, say whether we are right. We are talking about machines in the same data center, same zone or something like that, right? Because if it's in different regions, kind of like forget it.
Right.
Doesn't matter whether it's bare metal or VM.
Right. Unless he's talking about the new EKS mode that has whatever allows you to connect bare metal or virtualized nodes from on-premise into an EKS cluster and also have EKS node pools. And I think it's called EKS hybrid nodes.
I'm failing to see how that can work well if those are too far apart, because then you're fighting against laws of physics.
Exactly.
Speed of light.
Right. It can't be too far apart. You have to have like a direct connect or whatever, a very good line that's consistent with, whatever. The benefit in those cases, I think that for 99.9% of use cases, it's irrelevant. The places where it is relevant are what we're seeing now, some like cloud repatriation, right? Customers that want to move back to on-premise because of prices in the cloud and things like that, but that sometimes have large bursts. Right? Think e-commerce that all of a sudden Black Friday goes huge. So by having it with your typical node pools, let's say on-premise, that handle your day-to-day workloads, but having a small node pool in AWS that has Carpenter set up, that when all of a sudden things explode, boom, it goes up there. Okay, like that's great for those very edge-specific use cases. I don't recommend it for the faint-hearted because dealing with, you have different CPIs, different cloud providers. The storage is not going to be the same because you can't use EBS CSIE on premise. You can't use, right? So then you start getting into, okay, do you use Longhorn? Do you use Portworx? what do you use? You now need to have you get into so many different convoluted things that just make it a very difficult thing to manage. And there's just less practices around that in the market. So I prefer to keep my Kubernetes clusters as simple as possible and as standard as possible. Would be my view on this.
But still, if you do run on-prem and you need a burst outside of your capacity, it's better than nothing, right?
Exactly.
Kind of like if you need to have over your current capacity, there is no other option, right? Either you go to Best Buy and come back very fast.
Right. Exactly.
But what you can probably start then thinking about is policies. Okay, if I have a burst, those are the applications, potentially stateless applications or something like that will go there. Kind of like,
exactly.
It needs to be defined what goes there.
Here. You have to be very smart about how it goes. You need to be smart to make sure that you have as little traffic going from those pods in the cloud to the pods on premise, because the second that you do, that's egress traffic going outwards, and that's more money to the clouds. Right? So you want to have as little egress traffic from the cloud, as much ingress traffic as possible, no problem, as long as your network connection can suffice that because it doesn't cost more. But egress from the cloud is going to cost you a lot in those cases. So be warned, I would say.
Okay, one from before, from Danny. What are your thoughts on AWS EKS Auto Mode? And I will say that it's awesome. I haven't used it. Actually, let's start with that. Have you used it?
I
Scott?
have tried it once. Yes.
Okay, is
And
it similar
it's
to
what
GK Autopilot?
No.
No.
It isn't. It
Okay.
is and it isn't. It's closer to what AKS have done with their AKS automatic, right? Names, make sense. It's what EKS should have been from day zero. You have the ability to create a cluster that is functional when you click create. That means that it installs Carpenter automatically, so it's managing the node pools for you. It's unlike GK Autopilot because it actually is like standard Kubernetes nodes, and I can run daemon sets, and I can run things that you just can't. It doesn't have the limitations of what we have in GKE with Autopilot, right? It's more standardized, I would say. The nice thing with it is that it comes with basically everything out of the box. So you get the ALB ingress controller. You get, the managed managed add-ons. It's really straightforward. You can provision it all at once. Now, it does have Carpenter, right? So it's going to set things automatically. But you have the ability to also add. For example, what I like about Auto Mode is that you can break out. Meaning I can add a node pool of static nodes. If I need to, for whatever use case I have, I can add a static node pool of GPUs, let's say, on the side, have 90% of my cluster being auto, but 10% of it be my unique special cases where I've messed around with Kubelet to have some special settings because I need that. I can exclude add-ons that are managed. By default, it's going to manage add-ons like EBS CSI, and, different elements there, but I can exclude one of them if I want to have more control over its configuration. So I really like the approach they're taking, until it's fully there with, like, the cluster API provider, which is my preferred way of deploying EKS. Until that's integrated into their better integration into Terraform, into like the Crossplane providers then, right? Like it's going to take some time for it to fully bake, but the vision and the direction they took, I think, is 100% the right direction.
So let me ask you this then, since you already tried it. Do you still need to assemble 57 different things, infrastructure-wise, like subnets, VPCs, and internet gateways, and what's not, or is it closer to EKS GKE itself, kind of like
again?
cluster?
You need to create the networks in advance and the VPC, right? Just like in Azure, you have to create a resource group.
Okay.
In VNets, right? Like that's not let's say the core infra under the hood you have to handle, but it does handle like the IRSA elements for you when deploying the managed add-ons. What it does solve is like you don't need to create the EKS control plane, wait for that to finish, create the node pool, add the node pool, then create the EKS add-ons. You don't have all of the Kubernetes resources. You have one Kubernetes resource, a cluster. And that cluster defines the node pools, and it defines the cluster, and it defines the add-ons, and it defines all of that. So you still have the infra level.
That's nice. So basically, that's in a way, then my comparison with Autopilot was wrong. That's kind of closer to how GKE and AKS worked for a while, in a way.
Yeah. And again, it's it provisions the node pool, though, from day zero as well, which is really nice. And the inclusion of Carpenter out of the box, right? Where, like, you just create a cluster, you get Carpenter. I don't need to think about auto-scaling. It just does it for me. I don't need to think about node pools. It's a really nice feature. It's very similar to, again, AKS Automatic. And what they're doing, they have Node Auto Provisioner, which is the commercial integrated version of Carpenter in Azure. And that's in AKS Automatic, right? So the two offerings, very similar. It's how do I click a button and get a production-ready Kubernetes cluster?
Very cool, then. Finally.
Yeah. Exactly.
From right now, Kishore, how can I back up Crossplane composed resources and restored in other clusters. Tried Velero, composed resources restored, not working as expected. Whenever I used the Velero, I never had problems with restoring it. So did you experience any?
I haven't had any issues with it. I would recommend, Kishore, if you haven't, AWS put out a great blog post documenting exactly like how to do this for Crossplane. I would recommend looking at that. It's linked, I believe, in the Crossplane blog itself as well. But definitely worth looking at because they really go through all the things. And yeah, I haven't had issues with this, unfortunately, so I can't. Maybe if you wrote in the chat here what type of issue you had or something, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's usually kind of that, those are usually the cases where something weird is happening there. Well, you can also alternatively, if you ping me on Slack or Blue Sky or LinkedIn, you'll find me easily. We can have a screen sharing session and take a look.
Yeah, the one thing I would say on that is make sure if you were backing up like the whole cluster, just doing like a full cluster backup and then a full cluster restore, it won't work. Because you're going to get into issues of ordering. The way you have to do it is just back up the managed resources, the composite resources, the claims, install the providers, and when they're ready, restore your managed compositing claims.
Small correction. What you said is right, but you don't necessarily need to back up only Crossplane. You need to ensure that you're restoring only Crossplane.
Correct. You can. I find it much easier to set up the backup schedule once with that configuration, have it declarative, rather than your restore being, like this. When stuff that we don't mention hits the fan, when everything goes bad, that is when you don't want to be dealing with what is the syntax to figure out the filters of how I restore only a specific resource. You'd rather deal with that in the easy time when you're setting up the backups than at the restore time. I just want to click restore, is my view on that. Put the complexity at backup time. Create a full cluster backup also, just in case. So you have that. You never restore it, but you have it. Now restore your specific backups, and then if you ever needed to, you still have that full backup on the side just in case.
Okay, from Pavel, this is from before. I manage 8 EKS clusters. Unfortunately, there is a big mix because some are production, others are dev test stage. Prod environments, what is the best way to organize the environments? Just put them in different repositories in Git.
Well, so I have
one thing I'm not very fond, unless we're talking about large scale. I wouldn't necessarily create a separate cluster for dev and one for test and one for stage. I would definitely not mix production with non-production. But unless we're talking about scale, I would go easy and have 2 clusters there altogether.
So a lot of that really deals with the scale, deals with what you're doing and how much you're updating CRDs, things like that, because what you don't want to do is be updating in dev now some operator and then break your staging environment. That's going to stop you from being able to get to production because there's a breaking change in the APIs or whatever, right? So I think I go back and forth on that, how many environments, but no matter what, in my opinion, if you get to 8 clusters, however you got there, because you have multi-regions, because you have multi-clouds, because you have 20,000 different stages across the way and you can only put 10,000 in a cluster, right? Whatever the reasons that you got there are, I believe a fleet manager is something that the industry has felt the pain. The industry has not yet accepted the fact that we need fleet managers and the benefits that they can bring. And I believe that fleet managers, that's where we're seeing a lot of innovation today, whether it's the D2IQs of the world or my personal favorite is Spectral Cloud. But we saw it from Tanzu that have their Tanzu Mission Control, and you have Google Anthos, and you even have like AKS Fleet, right? Azure Fleet that does this in Azure specifically, or Advanced Cluster Manager from OpenShift. Right? This fleet manager that can handle all these clusters, that can kind of orchestrate upgrades, that can deal with all of this, is something that makes this a lot easier. So I strongly recommend looking in that area once you reach a certain scale. From my experience, it's usually anywhere from like 6 to 8 clusters is when it starts to make sense, and above 10 clusters is when I just think it's basically a necessity.
Yeah.
For sanity.
I mean, I tend to look at when I look at scale, I tend to count only production because that's usually a better indicator of the scale itself, right?
It is, although when you're talking about the scale of clusters, a dev cluster, I still need to upgrade it. I still need to maintain it. I still need to check, the different versions and how the upgrade from Cert Manager version X to version X.1 goes to make sure that I can do the same thing in production, and the upgrade of Crossplane, Y to Z, and all of these changes, right? I still need to test them out along the way and make sure that my, upgrades are going to work in production. This is all when we haven't reached the final state that we all, dream about, and no one is getting close to it yet in most cases, of, immutable clusters. Just, I need to upgrade, create a new cluster, just ship everything over to there and never upgrade a cluster. We're not there yet.
No, I agree with that we're not there yet. But I feel that people are not using enough ephemeral clusters, right? Like the example you said, I want to test the upgrade to production. I wouldn't mess up in any of the permanent environment. I would create a new cluster with the existing version, upgrade it, run some apps, whatever, test it, blah, 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 and that thing goes down.
I don't even public cloud people that believe we have unlimited resources.
But No. Actually, okay. So in on-prem, if there is any better reason to do that, that's even more in on-prem, right? Because you have more limited resources. You have bigger need to actually do the job and destroy it afterwards.
But you need a dev environment. What I'm saying is not on-prem. I don't necessarily have the ability to just create another cluster to test things. I don't necessarily have the resources to do it, or it may be I don't have the license amount from the commercial Kubernetes to create another cluster, right? Like, so it's not always as simple as that.
Yeah, I'm spoiled. I admit it. From Guy, how do you see Gen AI impacting DevOps teams in terms of Kubernetes and day-to-day operations? And I will split that question into two: today and the future. Because today I don't see it any significant impact, to be honest.
Yeah. At the beginning, Kate's GPT, very cool project, and I'm not, belittling the work there. It's very cool what they've done. I used it every day at the beginning, and I haven't touched it in over 6 months. It was kind of like that hype for me, and then I just, whatever. I think that tools like that are extremely beneficial when someone is starting in the Kubernetes world because it can help them. But over time, you just build muscle memory of, doing stuff manually, I think, in Kubernetes. I think where AI and all of that is going to help most with DevOps is just like it's helping developers. Automating the mundane tasks of creating a specific step in a GitHub action flow, of automating the, different elements around the SDLC that we are in charge of as DevOps practitioners or platform engineers. Bringing that in. I think DevOps and platform engineering with things like Backstage, things like Crossplane composition functions and all of that, there's more coding that is happening by DevOps now than ever before. And I'm saying coding in terms of not just scripting, which we've always been doing, but I kind of differentiate between scripting as a subset of coding from actual coding, and coding. That is where AI really helps. So I think that it's inevitably going to help us a lot because DevOps is moving more into that area with things like Backstage and Crossplane.
Oh yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say only with those. I mean, with anything kind of. If you don't write code,
it is, but those
you're
are the best
becoming,
examples.
Yeah.
Those are the best examples, I think, of something that started like where I actually have to write TypeScript or I have to write Go or Python to really gain those huge benefits. And you don't need to with Crossplane. You can use Go templating, KCL. If you work it up on, you can use KCL. Anyone can. But
one of these days, I'm going to convince you to try it. For real.
I tried it for about 30 minutes.
Come on. Okay.
I'll give it another try.
We're going to have a fight.
I'll give it another try at some point. But
yeah, it's what I think that. So I'm going to answer this from a different perspective. I don't see, in general, not only related to what we do, I don't see new products coming out of AI. I see AI becoming part of existing products. Kind of, it's a very special category, right?
Yeah.
I don't think that anybody should go to Discord to generate images, but that feature should be part of Photoshop, right? And
okay. Yeah.
I feel that the same thing will eventually happen to us. Right now, the example that you mentioned, coding, that's a good example because that's one of the rare cases where actually AI is integrated into something, and that something is VS Code, probably JetBrains, right? So it's useful. I'm not going to go to ChatGPT, copy and paste the output of something and say, can you generate something else based on this? I'm not doing that, right?
Right.
And for that to expand further, those features need to be part of the tools we're using, right? When it becomes, maybe one day, for example, AWS will release an agent that is baked into their Kubernetes clusters, EKSs, and then it will be doing something and it will be collecting information, whatever that. I don't know what that something is.
Right.
But until it becomes part of something bigger,
right,
it's a no-go for me.
Yeah. I will say, like, the two other examples that I've seen of that, one is Azure, actually. That have integrated into their portal of like the Azure portal and all of that. They have Copilot integrated that actually is like with augmentation against your against your Azure account. So like you can start asking about like when an error comes up, it's just like ask Copilot, right? Yeah. Or it's, where is this cluster, right? And like, so that's that deep integration again that is beneficial if you're a UI user of like the Azure portal, let's say. The other huge one is from AWS actually, and it's a Backstage plugin that they built that actually is taking it to the next level. And what their Backstage plugin does, what's the unique part, because we've had Rody have built, Ben Wilcock, who I don't know where he is now, he used to be on the Tanzu team, but that have built these, chatbots into Backstage, which is nice, right? And then there's the approach that Rody took, which is like RAG, where they'll just take all of your tech docs that have been ingested and add that in.
Exactly.
What changed here and why AWS is so cool is that they went down the agentic model of AI, where they have agents that basically hook up to your plugins. So Backstage is all about plugins that call out and pull in data at real time, like the Kubernetes cluster plugin pulls in data from Kubernetes. The AWS ones pull data from AWS. And what this does is it gives you a chatbot, but it will actually call out with your user to the Kubernetes plugin and get the data. And it will call out to the Jenkins plugin and get the Jenkins logs and call out to here. And so it's actually like pulling in the real-time data from all these places without needing to build a million agents, because it's just utilizing the routes that exist within Backstage already to pull that data and then give me contextualized results back of exactly what's going on. So it's actually really cool what they're doing. And I'm excited to see how that, moves forwards.
Okay, one from before, Andrei. Is it possible to implement effective approach to containerize and scale WordPress applications? I know nothing about WordPress except that it's written in PHP and that I haven't used it as a user for a long, long time. I don't know, you, Scott.
Yeah, so
Any-
it is possible to implement, containerization and scale of WordPress applications. The standardized approach is to use the Bitnami Helm chart. That's a de facto standard when it comes to Helm charts is if Bitnami have one and the vendor itself doesn't, so just use the Bitnami one because they're good quality and they're secure. One thing I will note, Bitnami Helm charts are now rate limited on Docker Hub, so make sure to use like a registry mirror or pay for the commercial version. But you can do that and then, easily set them up with HPAs and everything to auto scale. That's definitely an option that you have. I don't know of any WordPress operators or things like that, but the Bitnami Helm charts are very good for WordPress, and I've used them many times.
Very good. I didn't know that you are WordPress user.
WordPress is one of the best. WordPress is one of the best demo applications when you want to show the capabilities of like a replication or backup system or anything that because you go in a demo, you create a WordPress with Helm, you go add a blog post, you go and delete the PVC, and then you do the restore, and everything works. And yay, whatever. So it's a great demo application because of that. It's an easy app. So I mostly have used it for that. I haven't actually deployed a production WordPress on Kubernetes, although I know people that have. I personally do have a WordPress site, but it's hosted because I like hosting my own stuff that I don't care about and that I can destroy. My blog is on WordPress for many reasons, because I'm too lazy to do anything else, and it's just managed for me, and I just
Okay, from Miguel. This is now live. For self-hosted log storage, what would you use? Loki, ClickHouse, Victoria Logs, etc. And for log collection, Auto Collector, Vector Grafana Alloy. I wasn't sure that, I did not know that, I'm not sure that Grafana Alloy even has anything to do with logs, though.
Yeah,
But
it's usually Promtail to Loki.
Exactly. And I mean, I prefer Loki myself if it's self-hosted. I cannot say that I did the in-depth analysis of all of them, but Loki is... I know for Victoria metrics, I didn't know that there is Victoria logs, so I'm obviously not informed enough. And log collection, I have no strong preference. I know that I dislike Hotel Collector. It's just convoluted piece of software that does too many things, and it's very heavy.
Right. My standard, I was always a, open search / Elasticsearch, whatever person until
I had to remove him. He said Elasticsearch. Sorry,
Exactly.
Folks. That's unacceptable here.
as I was saying, I was always a fan. That was always what I had recommended until Loki really proved itself.
True.
There was no better solution other than Elastic / OpenSearch at that point, I believe. It was the best out there. It still is for many other things, not for log collection and all of that. It has its unique use cases. I am a fan of Loki personally, and I like using Promtail with that. If you're sending to external sources, my favorite is FluentBit. It's lightweight, it's easy, It does the job, it has lots of documentation, and it has the most usage. FluentD is just too heavyweight. I don't see the reason for it. And there's FileBeat and all of those things. Again, they're nice, but I don't see the reason to go away from what is basically like a de facto standard in FluentBit. So, yeah.
The only thing I will add is I had in my previous life experience with trying to use those exporters or whatever you call them to filter data and to do all that stuff and transform. I promised to myself I will never do that again. Kind of write the logs in whichever format you need. Don't if you start doing transformation, that's a never-ending story. That is just horrible.
Exactly. I know the one thing I will say, FluentBit have some very good documented, like, this is like a set of typical transformations and just stick with that. But they know how to deal with like Apache logs. They know how to deal with Nginx logs. They know how to deal with standard Kubernetes logs, which great. Have those transformations that are like the built-in ones. Don't start writing your own for each application. I completely agree there.
Okay. One from before, could you please suggest some advice to a 2-year-old DevOps engineer to grow further in the future? What things we need to learn and what quality we should possess? And so many people might disagree with me, but I think that people with 2 years of less years of experience shouldn't think about DevOps. They should, or kind of try to extend their scope to infinity. It's kind of figure out something, what you want to do. Want to be Kubernetes ninja? Do that, right? Want to focus on AWS? Do that. Focus. I feel that because the market demands kind of, oh, you're a jack of all trades. You're a DevOps something or SRE something. You're supposed to manage everything. And I simply feel that that's wrong, right?
Yeah.
And I do think that there's a lot of value to be generic, right? But after you became proficient in few things, right?
It's like my take that may be controversial, but I don't believe that there are really good, in 99.9% of cases, there is no such thing as a real full stack senior developer. There are people, when you are a full stack developer, typically that means you are a mediocre front end and mediocre back end, or maybe good at one and the other one you kind of know. Like, there's only so much space that a human brain can, so much that it can hold. I believe in specializing in X and having a wide understanding of, basic level across the board. But have deep on one subject. And you can change that subject over time. You can start in Kubernetes and boom, move to something else if you want to. But don't try at the same time to be an expert in 30 technologies. There are very few people on planet Earth that can do that. Because it's so much context switching, so much knowledge. And as systems become more and more complex, it becomes harder and harder.
Unless you want to be, there is a need for that kind of like zillion different technologies, but then you're not anymore dev or ops or DevOps. You're going into product management type of area,
or solution architect, right?
Or solution architect, professional services.
Exactly. You may be a solution architect at that point, and you can help architect the solution, but you're not going to be really as much hands-on at that point, right? So like the generic whatever is good, but typically, if you want to be hands-on, try and be as focused as possible while still having a broad understanding. I listen to, sessions on web frameworks and Java development and all of that because I want to understand what is going on in the industry. I listen to that at 2x speed when I'm driving in the car, and I pick up what I pick up. I don't pick up what I don't pick up, but I'm not an expert in Java or Node or TypeScript or any of that. I understand it enough, and that's the only level I need to reach to, right? And move on to what I actually deal with.
Okay, from Omer, live one. In an internal-only setup with up to 1,000 users, all on-prem, is it fine to use bare metal K3s or K8s nodes, or is an OpenShift-like platform better? And I'm a bit confused with this question because I have a feeling that the question is, should we use a distribution like OpenShift or not? Is that how you would understand this question, Scott?
So I could take it in two directions. I'm not sure really what's meant here. Is it like OpenShift meaning like the full platform that gives me everything, or is it like the idea of have a distribution, a actual like certified by a vendor, whatever, Kubernetes distribution?
I will assume the latter.
Right. If it's the latter, so then it's any like commercial Kubernetes thing that deals with lifecycle management and let's say core add-ons, right? Not the full OpenShift, UI with 10,000 operators and all of that type stuff. I believe that the answer is yes, you should be using some Kubernetes distribution that is not just some upstream open source one. The reason is that on-prem Kubernetes is difficult. On-prem Kubernetes has its quirks, and you want to have that support. You want to have the testing. You want to have the person to call. You want to have the person that will guide you, and you want to have that lifecycle management automation that is dealt with for you when there are breaking changes in the kubeadm APIs between version A and B, and you don't want to need to deal with that. Leave that to the vendors to deal with. As I've always said, when a company goes to should I build it or buy it, right? It comes down to, is this the prerogative of your company? Is this the main business of your company? If it's not the main business of your company, it's just an enabler for something. You are typically better off if it's a large investment to either buy it or use some widely adopted project that does this or anything. Because why deal with adding that complexity onto yourself? I just don't believe that that's the right approach. If you are going to do it on your own, K8s and not K3s at that scale. I believe that K3s is great for edge. K3D is great if you want to locally. I do not believe in K3s as a distribution for bare metal servers for 1,000 users.
I don't think it's actually actively worked on anymore either. I know that quite a few are switching away from it, so don't.
Exactly, but even if it was, it was built for a particular use case. That's the use case it should have, if it's not maintained any more than should have. But that's the use case, not for production.
As a general rule, if there is a Kubernetes distribution that is, among other places, widely used on people's laptops, that's the one you shouldn't use.
Yeah.
That's okay. So a question from Mateus. Hey, is Port open source? Can I host it inside my own infra? The answer to the first question is no. And the other question is not today, but I think that they're working on it.
Yeah, today it is only SaaS. There are agents that you can do for proxying things to your infra, but it is a SaaS offering as of today, at least.
Oh, this is a tough one. How to speak at top tech events like KubeCon? And
as someone who has never been accepted to KubeCon,
really?
I will pass it on to Victor to answer. I've spoken at OSS Summit and other, conferences, never at KubeCon. Holding my, hopes for this year, we'll see, but I'll leave that one to Victor, who speaks basically every time.
Oh, you'll find out on Monday.
Exactly.
It's tough. And it's tough for, let's start with this. It's highly unlikely to be accepted no matter who you are. Let's start with that, right? Because it depends on which track you submit, who is reviewing. People are all biased. And when I say biased, I don't mean biased kind of like, I don't want to hear about this or that. It's kind of, we all have our own opinions, what is good, what is bad, right? So it depends a lot on who is reviewing. Again, not because they're bad people or kind of negatively biased, but kind of we all have opinions what is a good thing, right? And there is no rule. There are actually a couple of rules, right? Without me revealing what those are, right? But there are certain types of sessions that are more likely to be accepted than others. There are certain types of sessions that are less represented. So, for example, I'm one of the reviewers in one track, right? And let's say that we try to strike a balance between easy, medium, and hard, or whatever the namings are, sessions, right? And there is a balance there. And then if you see that, okay, there is a relatively small number of talks submitted from one, that increases chances of those entering, right? Because, hey, we want to put 30 of each, and there is only 40 within this category. You're more likely to enter. But again, you don't know in advance what will be submitted. I cannot give you the rule, kind of always submit it as easy, right? Diversity plays a lot of role. Now, the toughest one of all is the speakers also influence a lot, right? When somebody says, okay, so this is a session from Kelsey Hightower, that gets almost immediately accepted simply because reviewers know that he's going to deliver a great talk, right?
Yeah.
And that's the only thing you're not in control of, right? The only thing you can do is submit to a lot of places and start building that reputation.
Right.
And that reputation is important because it's not only reputation, kind of, oh, do people know me, right? But you're building the skill to talk at events,
Exactly.
right? And like Scott, right? I didn't know until now that you were not in KubeCon, but there is a higher chance that when you submit something, you will be accepted because people heard you talk in, I don't know, day zero
Exactly.
event, or whatever it is.
Right. At DevConf, at OSS Summit, at this and whatever. It's also, I can say, like, over the last few years, I've been growing the amount of conferences I've spoken at. And over time, you get much more natural at it, much better at reading the crowd, much better at, your flow, your confidence on stage, Don't start from the huge conferences. Start from the smaller ones, gain your traction there, learn the mistakes, learn, how to improve at the smaller ones and slowly make your way up. There's no rush. KubeCon's going nowhere. Kubernetes is here for the next few decades. It will still exist. Don't worry. So I'd say, work your way up there. Start at the smaller ones, start at the KCDs, at the local Cube Days, KCD, things like that. Slowly start, yeah.
One also suggestion is that if your talk gets rejected in KubeCon proper, there is day zero event and there are rejects. And like in the upcoming KubeCon in London, I accepted one of the talks because I heard that talk in rejects. That's the talk that was rejected in Salt Lake City. I heard it in rejects, and when we were discussing talks, I said, this is a great talk. I think that this one should be in.
Wait. You went to a session at a conference, Victor?
There is a story. Yes, but there is a perfectly valid explanation. I ended up being MC. So I had to be. No, wait. So I had to be at the beginning, at the end. But there were a couple of talks that I stayed because, hey, actually, this is cool.
Okay. I'll accept that. Like, that's fine. But, okay.
Yeah, I know. I was surprised as well. Actually, I heard more talks in Salt Lake City on rejects than in the last decade in all other conferences. Okay, so are certifications really important for DevOps role more than actual experience?
No.
And absolutely not. Zero. Absolutely not.
Actual experience is the number one thing. Certifications can help you get the door open for an interview many times. It will not get you the job. What will get you the job is the actual experience. It's when you go in there and talk about the actual experience, that's what's actually going to land you the job, and that's what really matters. After enough years of experience in the field, certifications also are less looked at, right? Especially the low level ones, right? The top level, top, like hands-on, whatever ones. Okay, those may mean something, but for the multi-choice ones from every cloud that are next, and that you learn from a dump before, that a lot of people do that. I don't know. I've never looked at a dump for a exam in my life for a certification, but I know that it's very common too. I
would go as far as to say that if you go on an interview for a specific job, kind of, oh, this is for this, whatever that is, and you say, and you prove that you have, let's say, 10 years of experience in that, and somebody asks you, yeah, but are you certified? I think you should just turn around and leave. Kind of like,
Yeah.
if that company values more certification than your 10 years of experience, don't.
Right.
Just don't.
Yeah.
Okay. This is cluster API over Crossplane or combine both. And I'm pretty sure that Scott has strong opinions about that. I think that they're very different. I feel that cluster API is a very good and convenient way to create more or less opinionated and manage opinionated clusters, right? Hey, this is how you do EKS, right? And you get Kubernetes controllers, and so on and so forth. You have high-level API, absolutely awesome, right? Crossplane can do that as well. But Crossplane is more about you created opinionated something. And it's not focused on Kubernetes clusters, right? You have much bigger variety of what you can do related to Kubernetes clusters out of the box with Cluster API, right? Crossplane gives you building blocks to create Cluster API-like experience, in a way.
When you are in the cloud using managed Kubernetes services and not when you are on premise.
Yes.
And that's where Cluster API its
let me
biggest
correct you
value is
there.
on-prem.
Let me correct you there slightly, because what you said is kind of what most Crossplane users say, but I don't agree. I wouldn't say for managed resources. I would say as long as you have Kubernetes resources that can do something, you can compose them through compositions. Whether that comes from Crossplane providers or elsewhere, it's
Correct.
fine.
What I'm saying is good luck creating a highly available control plane on vSphere or on bare metal nodes on premise without having a API that you talk to say, give me control plane, right? Like that just because I don't have that, I don't have a control plane. I don't have a crossplane provider. I don't have a Kubernetes object that does that. So like that's where really all the benefit of the imperative tasks of managing Kubernetes cluster lifecycle is where Cluster API gives you a declarative interface above that, and it handles it extremely well. I believe that Cluster API is the de facto best way to manage Kubernetes clusters if you have on-premise clusters. 100%. I don't believe that there is any legitimacy for anything except Cluster API when you are on premise. I throw out distributions that exist out there from my mind. If they aren't based on Cluster API, they become irrelevant to me because if I am on premise and it does not have Cluster API, then it is just stuck back in the Iron Age in my mind. For cloud, I'm not sure that I would go with Cluster API if I'm just EKS. Or I would go with Cluster API if I'm just GKE, or if I'm just AKS. But if I'm multi-cloud and I'm all of this, the abstraction level that Cluster API gives me is a very nice capability. And if, for example, I've seen this before in people that want to be in AWS but not use EKS. A lot of times that can be for pricing reasons of, for example, I want audit logs, but I want to configure what that audit policy is and I want to send it to an S3 bucket and not to CloudWatch so that my bill doesn't go up to the moon. So you see people that want to do kubeadm-based clusters. Then use Cluster API. So it's either use the manage from the cloud or use Cluster API. And if it's on-prem, only Cluster API. Crossplane above that if you want to create a better abstraction.
I was about to say more often than not, you will not have only Kubernetes clusters, right? And then you have potentially two options there. You can do Crossplane for everything else, and Cluster API for clusters, or you can put Crossplane on top of Cluster API and say, I'm going to create a unified API, and behind the scenes, because at the end of the day, Crossplane compositions, and now I'm ignoring now providers, right? Just compositions. Mm-hmm. Compositions are about combining Kubernetes resources, composing them into something. And there is nothing really terribly wrong with saying, okay, one of my compositions is going to take cluster API and compose it. Maybe alone, maybe with some other things. That's
I have that in my
legit.
environment. I have that in my lab environment as an easy way to create a Kubernetes cluster that then installs the CNI onto it, installs FluxCD because I'm not an Argo person, installs ABCDE, installs, all these things, and creates a DNS record for me, right? So like all of that because a Kubernetes cluster is not Kubernetes. Kubernetes cluster is Kubernetes plus external DNS plus external secrets plus Prometheus plus Grafana plus Loki plus this plus that plus this plus this. And then you have a cluster that you can actually deploy a workload to. So that is where Crossplane comes in. The Kubernetes lifecycle itself, that's where Cluster API comes in. Using the Kubernetes provider, very easy to integrate the two. Yeah.
Cool. So the short version, both. Okay, now the last one from before that we didn't catch. Oh, we're almost at the time. Wasm in server is future of microservices which could replace Kubernetes. No. Let me start by saying, and you shoot at me, Scott, if you did. First of all, those are mixing two very different things. Wasm, in my head, is comparable with containers.
Yeah.
Up to a degree, right? And then there is an ecosystem around containers. Today, that's mostly Kubernetes, right? That gives you everything else you might need. Containers, and in a way, Wasm almost are glorified zip files, right? There are ways how we can package something and put it in a server and then run it and then combine it with everything else. So the question could be, is Wasm the future that could replace containers? Maybe. I'm not convinced, but maybe. Most likely it will be that there will be use cases for Wasm and there will be use cases for containers. Or maybe not, we'll see. But it's definitely not replacing Kubernetes. If anything, if I would have money to invest, and somebody would say you have to invest it in something related to Wasm, I think that the future of Wasm is to be plugged into Kubernetes cluster. Because building the ecosystem that Kubernetes has, that's close to impossible, right? Because it involves thousands of people from hundreds of companies that built it. And I'm doubtful that Wasm can... Actually, let me rephrase that. Wasm itself, Wasm community can build its own ecosystem, but it will be for a limited and very specific use cases, not as broad as Kubernetes.
Yeah. So I think that Wasm was a hype that very quickly died down, and it's much less heard today in the market, much less, interest. It got like this huge hype, and it's kind of like mellowing out, it seems, at least from like, what I'm seeing and who I'm talking to and the content that I'm seeing out there. I don't think it gained the traction or it was enough of a, oh my God, that got people to change their ways. And it still has so many complexities to it and rough edges. I think that Wasm is amazing for in the browser. That's what it was initially for. And I think that's where it's going to stay. The one place in Kubernetes that if you ask me where it should exist and where there was even a POC of this done, and I believe it's like where it makes sense, is for admission controllers, but not what, I forgot which tool it was. I think it's KubeWarden, if I got it correct.
Yes.
Right? Not what they're doing.
But KubeWarden is Wasm running in containers.
Exactly.
Just to be...
Exactly, which I don't understand, adding that level of complexity. What I like with the idea of Wasm, there was a POC that was done of taking Wasm and injecting it into the API server itself. So running untrusted code in the API server because it's a Wasm module, so it's safe. And then the idea of that was that you don't have the webhooks and the extra network traffic every time for the custom admission controllers. So if you could inject in Wasm modules into the API server, you could get, for example, OPA without any webhooks. You could get Kyverno without any webhooks. And that would be extremely interesting because you solve a lot of issues that exist with communication with managed control planes. You deal with a lot of issues that exist with, webhooks and do they fail open or fail closed. You deal with a lot of challenges this way, and I view it almost similar to like eBPF programs in the kernel would be Wasm programs in the API server. I think that would be interesting.
One thing I would add is that if Wasm appeared, and when I say Wasm, I don't mean browser Wasm, but
Right.
Packaging,
server
whatever.
Wasm, let's say. Or
Server Wasm.
Right.
If it appeared around the same time as Docker, the story would be very different.
Correct. Wasm would have won.
Right? Yeah, because it's without a doubt superior system to containers. But the question is it superior enough for us to switch?
It's not superior enough in my mind with the ecosystem that we have today.
I intentionally said superior to containers, right? But that's the thing. Ecosystem, I mean, let's face it, if people would be would care only about containers, we would be still running Docker in production, right? It's not about containers.
Listen, it's what I would say. Podman is better than Docker. From a security perspective, from all that, it's better. I will not use Podman because it has all those weird edge cases where it's not the same. Now, do I wish that when Docker was created and became the standard that it was built securely and everything did not run as root by default and that it didn't need right? Like all of these didn't need a running daemon running as root. Yes, I would have loved that. I think that Podman is a better approach. What can we do that the industry went with Docker? And there's only so much we can fight that, and changing standards, that's an easier one, and even that isn't succeeding, right? People are with Docker still, like, de facto. So, yeah, I just don't see it happening.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure that it will, it is happening in certain cases. I know quite a few companies use Wasm. Not as a, let's put it this way, it's not replacing Kubernetes, period. Whether it will have 2% of the market or 10% of the market compared to containers, I don't know that. It has something, but it's not replacing Kubernetes.
Right.
Okay, we're at the top of the hour, a bit over. If I don't mess it up, I will copy the questions from this session. We're gonna put it in the next session. This is never ending. See you all next week. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.